I'm going to talk about the burlap sack method of rendering wax in large quantities. What I needed first was a 30-gallon barrel. You can also use a 55-gallon drum. You also need a way to light a fire underneath it. What I chose to do is use my fire pit, and I just had to elevate it a little bit more so I can get some additional wood under there. So I made it 3 blocks high. And then another thing you need is obviously a water source, because you need to fill that barrel with water approximately 2/3 of the way, or basically enough to sink the entire burlap sack into the water. So I had a burlap sack that was partially filled with loose comb, and I just wanted to make sure that I can do this in bulk. So I grabbed more comb. Some of it was from rendering honey out of the comb using the crushed comb method. And I just filled this sack as much as I could. I pushed the comb down and compressed it a little bit so I can fit more in. One very important thing to remember is to weight down the sack itself. So you want to put some decent sized heavy rocks or stones inside of the burlap sack. And then after that, I just made sure I tied it off really good. I actually used a wire to do that, but you can use anything. So in my research, I found that there's a certain temperature that you shouldn't go beyond when melting the wax. So I had to just make sure that I had a thermometer so I can take the temperature of the water. Now this first thermometer I tried using only went up to 120, so I had to look for something different. What I eventually ended up using was a kitchen meat thermometer that had an alarm on it that could tell me when the temperature of the water was getting too high. So I built my fire and let the water heat up for quite a while. And I went out to look for something to put in the bottom of the barrel so that the burlap sack is not actually touching the bottom metal of the barrel. The water's getting hotter here, and it's around 100 degrees. So I just have to go around to 40 degrees more. I put a rock in there as well as the wax inside that burlap sack. And once this reaches around 140 degrees, we're going to put it in the barrel. I put 2 patio stones in the bottom of the barrel so that the burlap sack doesn't touch the bottom, so that the wax is actually heated up and melts just from the heat of the water instead of the heat of the steel. So I have my sieve here, just to skim, because I have a dirty barrel. I just want to make sure that I get as many impurities as I can out before I put the wax in. Alright, I've got my wax to be rendered here. I'm putting it into my 3/4 filled barrel. So I filled the water up to about this mark, and I'm just pushing this down into the hot water. I can feel the wax melting already. I just have to submerge it enough. There's still a lot of air in that comb. I think that one rock I put in the burlap sack isn't quite enough yet. Alright, I have another rock here on top. But actually that rock still isn't heavy enough, and it still wants to float. Alright, this should do the trick. I'm filling this bucket with pea gravel. I'm actually going to take the lid off, let the water go inside. Water's really hot now. A bucket full of pea gravel is holding it down. Now the water level is to about here. With all that stuff in there, it's being displaced. Originally I had the water line up to here, and once I put the rocks in the burlap sack, And now that bucket, the water level is up to about here. And hopefully we'll start seeing some wax coming up to the top of the water here soon. So as you can see, my little handy dandy thermometer is already maxed out at 120. You can see the water percolating. One thing I'm finding is I'm having to keep this fire stoked pretty hot. Looks like it's about time to go grab some more from my wood pile. Now I can visibly see the wax and some foam coming to the top. It actually dries around my finger. Nice. Lots of air trapped in there. So this is pretty cool to see. We're actually getting a nice layer that's cooling on top. It's been about 3 hours since I started this process of building the fire and filling the barrel, and I'd say it's been around an hour for this burlap sack to percolate, and every so often I'm just going in and poking the burlap sack. I stoked the fire and put a lot of logs in there, and it just looks like the water is boiling and all the wax on top is staying in the melted state. So that's probably an example of something not to do. So in the burlap sack method, controlling the fire is definitely going to be important. After a couple of hours of letting it percolate, I eventually put the fire out and poured some cool water into the barrel to let the wax harden. Here's all the wax from today. And all the slum gum attached to the other side. Now the next step after this would be to remove all of the slum gum that is attached to the bottom of the wax, and you can use a wire brush or a knife just to scrape that off. And here's all of the slum gum that's left over in the sack. When I took it out of the water later, you can see that it's very little wax content in there. So what I did was just poured it into my garden for next year so that it has time to compost. And you can see all sorts of casings and dead bees and all sorts of other junk inside of that bag. So the only thing left to do was to empty out the 30-gallon drum and do some cleanup.